Okay, well let's start with where you're from and who you are.
Okay, my name is Ron Vaillant, and I'm from Lacombe, Alberta.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a parachute candidate.
Parachute candidate. Well,
Yeah.
we've got two of those here. So
Is that right?
Well, the candidate for Caribou Prince George is a parachute candidate.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, and the reason that happened was they had a candidate, but then he wasn't able to do it. He didn't quite count the cost, I think.
For Prince George Peace River, is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So they had no candidate at all. So your friends from Alberta came and helped.
That's good.
Yeah.
So what prompted you to get into this? So,
Well, I just see
why the People's Party of Canada.
Yeah, well, I just see Canada at a tipping point. You know, I've watched politics all my life and whatnot, but in the last little while, the way things have been going, and if you look at behind the scenes what's going on, you see that Canada's at a tipping point at this point. And this, like I tell people, it's the most important election of our lifetimes, if not Canadian history, actually. And so the People's Party of Canada just came up as a new party. It started September 14th in 2018 by Maxime Bernier. He had left the Conservative Party after being there for a decade, ran for the leadership race, came in second. He didn't leave because he was disgruntled. He stayed on for a whole year after that, but he basically said that the Conservative Party is intellectually and morally corrupt and cannot be reformed. And I could have told him that back in the 80s with Mulrooney. You know, saved him a lot of trouble. But anyhow, yeah, so at this time last year, I thought that Canada was basically done. Like, if things continue on the way they are going in the next 20 years, we're going to have people having combat boots in Canada.
So what? That's kind of drastic.
It is, yeah.
What things are? What's done? What is?
Well, there's many things. It's many things that are. You know, the number one thing actually that has prompted me over the years is the debt issue. You know, like if you go look at Venezuela 20 years ago was one of the nicest countries in the world to live in. They got one of the largest oil reserves. You know, they should be just fantastic. But what they've done is they've borrowed way too much money. You know, with the oil prices being high, and now that the people are starving in the streets. You know, the average Venezuelan has lost 20 pounds. They've eaten all their zoo animals, you know, these kind of things. You know, people have gone in there and they're eating their pets, and millions have left the country, and women are prostituting themselves to survive. It's gone into a hellhole. And it's all because they went ahead and borrowed too much money, and now they went and inflated their dollar. Like, their dollar is worth nothing. It takes a whole backpack just to buy a loaf of bread. Yeah, so, and see, we're heading that way. I'd say probably 75% there. And so if you go ahead from the Pierre Trudeau on to now, when you add up all the debt that they've accumulated, it adds up to being about $720 billion. It's about $80,000 per family of four. So how's that going to be paid? And when you add in the provincial debt, it's up to about $133,000 for a family of four. Mm-hmm. And what's happened is, in 1974, under Pierre Trudeau, we went from the Bank of Canada, you know, lending from the Bank of Canada, to lending to private corporations, private banks. And you know, the St. Lawrence Seaway was paid for that way, the Trans-Canada Highway, and basically zero, you know, low interest, right? And so now we're borrowing from private banks at compound interest. And we've paid over $1.3 trillion in interest since that time, you know, till about 2015, Pierre Trudeau to 2015. We're paying $25 billion a year just in interest. So the equivalent would be like a family that has 12 maxed out credit cards, and they're just making interest payments on those credit cards. But hey, there's no problem, because we got 3 more credit cards that we can go and rack up more debt on.
But the argument against that is that the debt to GDP ratio is still under control. But I mean, at what point, you know, is it? The argument is that you can still afford the debt.
Oh, so. Yeah, sure.
well,
okay, but I mean, factor in the fact that you're $80,000 for a family of four. Then that's a lot of money. Where's that going to come from? And there's no end in sight. That's the whole thing. And you know, actually, this gets more radical. But I mean, there's a fellow named Jonathan May back in the '80s. I listened to audio cassette tape of his. And he was high up with the International Monetary Fund, and he was actually falsely, you know, framed or whatever, and put in prison to shut him up. And he was interviewed in prison actually, and he was stating that the International Monetary Fund's goals are to gain control of the entire world through debt. So when countries go so far into debt that they can't make their payments, they say that's no problem. We'll go in there and we'll just take the resources or this or that, right? And another one that kind of corroborates with that or whatever is John Perkins, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. That's worthwhile watching. If you watch the 30 minutes, there's 1 hour and a 30-minute section or whatever, a shorter one. But if you watch 10 minutes of that, you'll get a good idea of what's going on. So, I mean, the thing is that an average family, they can manage their household finances better than the government of Canada or the BC government or the Alberta government. It's just ridiculous, really. And so there's a reason why we're going into so much debt. So the debt issue is a huge one right there. I mean, but there's many facets to the thing that we're facing actually. So, but yeah, so that's what prompted me, is just seeing that that we're in such a bad turmoil. And now the thing is that I was kind of completely out of politics. Like, I voted for Brian Mulroney to get rid of Trudeau, right? And then Brian Mulroney conned us with a GST. I remember watching it as a young man, right? He's comparing the price of a car or whatever and how it's going to, the manufacturing tax compared to the GST and all this kind of. But really, I mean, it was kind of like in the shadows that all of the services are going to be taxed and everything else, right? Because before that, we weren't paying, tax on getting our car fixed or getting a haircut, right? So I felt that Brian Mulroney conned us totally at that point in time. And so then I was kind of out of it and just kind of walked away. And then I voted when the Reform Party joined with the Alliance, I guess it was called. But I voted then, and then I voted again because Justin Trudeau, I didn't want to see him get in, right? Mm-hmm. So I held my nose and voted the Conservatives, actually. And but now, so what happened was actually is I was just online, I guess, and then I heard that there was a leadership race that had passed about a year previous for the Conservatives. And I thought, okay, let's take a look. And I listened to Andrew Scheer for a minute or two, and I think I said, may God help Canada, because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It's just another one of those politicians. And I thought, who is this Maxime Bernier guy who came in second? And I listened to him and what he had to say and his authenticity, the way he spoke and his conviction. It was completely the opposite. And I said, there it is, there's something there, right? So I started chasing it down and looking. And then after that, what happened was Maxime Bernier starts the People Party of Canada. And it's based on his platform that he ran on for the Conservative leadership race. And it's just amazing. And actually, as what's happening is they're rolling it out. They're rolling it out now to be even better. Like, they're improving upon it. So yeah, so that's kind of like that. So it's a bit radical. But
so one of the other issues from the party that has been a target is the issue of immigration and refugees.
Yes, we just rolled that out.
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
Well, explain it to me. And because I guess one of the tags is that the party is anti-immigration.
Oh, we're not at all. No. We're all immigrants. I mean, my family immigrated into Canada in the late 1600s on one side and the early 1700s on the other side. We're all immigrants. That's not a problem. It's the type of immigration that we have and how much. Because the UN right now, with the UN Compact on Global Migration, which Ahmad Hussain, our immigration minister, helped draft up, it basically gives migrants rights to come into Canada and take part of our social system and everything else. It's kind of overriding our entire.
But the UN Compact on Migration is non-binding to any government.
It's non-binding, but why do you sign it then? And when you actually go and look at it, it talks about the rule of law all the time, and the rule of law is basically the international rule of law. So, and you see it actually being implemented in Europe, even though they say it's non-binding, but you see actually things being rolled out as if it was binding. The non-binding thing, I think, is just to get people to stand down and say, well, it's not really an issue, but it's being rolled out. Yeah. And so, but anyhow, so we just rolled out our immigration platform, and really the best thing for people to do, which I recommend, is just go to peoplespartyofcanada.ca. And there's a platform right there. It's a short read. You can just look at the headlines and you can get a pretty good idea of what we're all about. But if you want to dig deeper, you just go ahead and tap on one, and it's well written. It's short, and like here is and actually what they do is as we add a new one, it goes to the top of the list, right? It's not like it's the most important, but this one is the last one that we put out. It says Canadian identity, ending official multiculturalism and preserving Canadian values and culture. and then the one before that was the refugees.
So what is the Canadian identity?
Well, a Canadian identity is our Western democracy, freedom, and equality and rule of law.
And multiculturalism doesn't fit into a democracy?
Not if you have extreme radical Islam. No. And actually, Maxime Bernier, he's when he spoke about this, he's the first politician to ever say this. He says that political Islam or Islamism is the greatest threat or ideological threat to the world. And so basically, because they basically want to have Sharia law. They want to implement their dictates on all of us. And so it totally goes against Western democracy, and this is allowed to flourish in Canada. So so that's a very difficult point, and we want freedom of religion. But if your freedom of religion mandates that you tell me and force me to comply to your religion, then that doesn't work, right? So Maxime Bernier said that, and it should have been front page news of all across Canada in every city, you would think. But we're being shadow banned actually, because we have a common sense revolution here, and they're just, they're not playing it. And we're also being shadow banned on the internet actually too as well. People are posting things and then they're not going through and whatnot, and people are wondering what's going on. But yeah, it is a common sense revolution that we have. And, so those are, issues on immigration. I mean, we want to lower immigration to a sustainable level, whereas the other parties, they want to increase it. And the Conservatives, they're willing to go along. They're basically, the Conservatives and the Liberals are like two sides of the same coin, I call it, or they're like the same, left and right wing of the same hockey team, and they're basically passing the same political puck back and forth, but it just gets to be a different kind of a flavor, to suit whether you're left or right kind of a thing. So I mean, right now we have a 21st century Bobby Orr coming on the scene, and that's a PPC, and we're going to go and intercept that political puck, and we're going to slap shot it right out of the rink and out of the auditorium, and we're going to throw down a new puck, and it's basically going to be based on, our platform of individual freedom.
Well, what do you think your chances are? The latest poll, I think I saw with the Canada 338 had the People's Party at something like 0.3%.
0.3, yeah, it's ridiculous. Actually, over in, I was watching CTV, I think it was, and they were talking to someone who's a Conservative, and their internal polling was saying that in Alberta it's at 10%.
In Alberta?
In Alberta, yeah.
But,
or 12, yeah. But the thing with the polling, I mean, we're going to go through exponential growth. Look, we haven't really advertised up until now, right? I mean, right now, 9 out of 10 people really don't know who the PPC is. In general, maybe 8 out of 10 now, I guess. But as soon as people find out what we're about, our platform, they get excited. And almost 90% of the people will say, yeah, I like it. The only thing they're concerned about is splitting this Conservative vote thing, right?
Yeah.
And getting Trudeau back in, which, I can see it's valid to a point. But what they have to understand is the Conservatives basically are the same as the Liberals. Why would, if you hate Justin Trudeau so much, why would you go and vote in another Trudeau? I mean, you got Trudeau, he's got a disingenuous speech and he has a fake smile, and Andrew Scheer comes across the same way to many people. And really, when you go and look at it, the Conservatives, from Pierre Trudeau till now, the Conservatives have actually racked up 40% more debt than the Liberals. So the first thing that I would want in a Conservative government is financial responsibility. So if they can't handle even the basic thing of finances, and I don't think that the Conservative Party is even conservative. I don't know that anything that is conservative about it. And really, they should take away the Conservative. They don't deserve the name Conservative. And when you look at it, what they did there in it was September 25th, 27th of 2015, a month before the election. Okay, the Stephen Harper government, and Bob Zimmer was a part of that, and everything else. And they went and adopted the UN Agenda 2030. Okay, now when you look at it from the surface, it looks like it's a good thing, but basically what you're doing there is you're having the UN being the authority over top of our government and our whole system here. The highest level of government in our, should be within Canada. It shouldn't be an outside body telling us what to do. And if you look at it deeply enough, you're going to see that the Agenda 2030 is basically like a 21st century hybrid communism. because they want to be able to dictate to us what our consumption is going to be. They want to be able to have the rich nations become poorer and the poor nations become richer, like communism, you know.
So you think Canada should become more like the States is moving, and that become more insular and more isolated on the world stage?
No, I wouldn't compare it to the United States at all. I would just say that what we need to do is not have the UN dictate to us what we should be doing in our country. And the United Nations, they want to be able to control 50% of the world's land and water in the future, you know, under their program, right? And then here we're wondering about, you know, the caribou issue, right? With all the land management, you know, people are not allowed to go ahead and develop the land there to save the caribou. And that's just like right out of the playbook out of the UN. And the same thing is, I talked to a guy just the other day, he's from Alberta, he's a forester and logger. And he said the same thing's going on there. The huge tract of land they can't go and, you know, forest or harvest, and it's to save the caribou. And he says, well, there's no caribou there. The caribou are further north. You know what's going on. And so that's the play that's going to be made. Like, actually, there's a website called CPAWS. It's a non-profit organization, and you know, they're talking about, if I can read it here. Under the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, Canada has already committed to protecting at least 17% of its land and fresh water by 2020. And they want to increase that to 30% here coming up in the not too distant future. And so what they're going to do is they're going to rewilding of America. There's a map on it. They want to basically have it so that most of the land that we actually have access to now will be off limits. And they're going to drive us into compact cities. I knew about this 20 years ago, and I thought it was pretty radical. I thought there's no way that they're going to be able to pull that off, but they're doing it right now. And this is just a start of it. You know, the caribou's one thing, and it'll be the next thing and the next thing. And
so who are all these people in the UN that are doing this?
I don't know the people in the UN.
Well, they must have faces. They must have.
I don't know the names.
It's easy to say, oh, it's the UN. They're bad.
Yeah.
They're bad. They're bad. They're coming to get us. But are they? Who are these people? Who are they? Are they real?
Well, it's the UN policies.
Paris and New York.
The Paris Accord.
The Paris Accord, and out of New York, that's the two headquarters. Okay.
Yeah, I know where they're headquartered.
Oh yeah, no, I don't know the individual names, particularly of all the people who make up all these policies. But I just know what the policies are to a degree, and how it's affecting us and how it will affect us.
So while we're on the UN, the climate change would be another one. Do you believe climate change is real?
Well, okay, before we even get into that, like, just look at, okay, when Andrew Scheer won the leadership race in the Conservatives, the very first thing he did, not the third or 10th thing, is he forced all of his MPs to vote in favor of the Paris Accord. Okay, so if you're going to go ahead and vote for the Conservative candidate in your area, you're voting for basically to go ahead with the Paris Accord implemented in Canada. Even though they say there's not going to be a carbon tax, it's just like Jason Kenney did the same thing in Alberta. He says, you know, hard-working Albertans shouldn't have to pay a carbon tax, and everyone's kind of high-fiving as after that. And then right away he says, but we're going to go after the heavy emitters. Okay, so what they're going to do is they're going to have to create a whole, ecological police force to go into all the businesses and say, okay, you're capped as how much CO2 you're allowed to release, right? And and that's actually worse than a carbon tax, because now you're getting up this whole bureaucracy set up and everything else. And down the road, they're going to go to you and say, you know, your smart meter's telling us that you have too much CO2 emissions according to what the UN would want you to have. So this is where it's going. And the UN is actually the one who's going to be dictating the terms on all of this. So, but anyhow, okay, as far as climate change goes, I mean, as far as CO2, man-made CO2, in our party platform on it, we actually are the only ones who actually talk about that as far as the platform goes. And basically, see, what they're doing right now is they're saying is they're calling it a climate emergency now. They're not calling it climate change.
Yeah. And
they're also calling it a nature emergency. Everything's an emergency. That's why you got to take all the land away, you know, and people can't work with it anymore and whatnot, and all of these things come down our throats. But I remember as a kid in the 70s, in science class, maybe you had the same thing too, but they were teaching us from the 50s to the 70s that the Earth has been cooling and we're going into an ice age. And I remember my teacher actually scaring us, saying that we're all going to die of an ice age down the road. But I had this handy little thing, actually I pulled it out, and it's called the BS meter, and it started chirping. And I said, I don't believe that, you know, like I don't believe this ice age is going to kill us all. But yet it still scared me in a sense. And then after that, they changed it to now we're all going to die because of it's increasing in temperature. But when you start researching all of this stuff, you realize that these IPCC scientists, it's all computer modeling. That's how they're projecting all of this. And guys have broken it down. They're saying that the computer models are at least 8 times overcooked, and they leave specific things out and whatnot. And there's another thing called ClimateGate, because they had leaked emails from all of these scientists, who are projecting all of this stuff. And they're talking about how we have to create an emergency and a scare and everything else for people to listen to us. So it's worthwhile investigating that. So as far as CO2 being the great danger to our society, myself, I don't see that as the case at all. I mean, you have Patrick Moore. He actually helped start the Greenpeace movement. Okay, and he was the only scientist of the bunch of the guys who were doing that. And he's with the PPC in the sense that he says no, it's a non-issue. And there's many things you can talk about the whole issue. And basically the thing is that we're burning plants or whatever that that's where it all came from. And the plants took the CO2 from the atmosphere of this day, right? So we're just releasing that. And really, there's only 3.8% CO2 in the entire atmosphere, roughly, is what they estimate. And then man's contribution is another 3.8 of that. So you're talking a minuscule amount. And then Canada's like 1.6 of that. And yet our forests, when I drove here for the last 5 hours, all I saw was forest. And our forests actually will absorb 10 times of what we emit, And yet China is not being regulated in that way, right? And so no, I don't know. It's to me, it's a con job, and what it is it basically is going to be the engine to drive forward the UN agenda to be able to set up the world government. Because it's all in emergency. We have to all come together to save the planet, and we're all going to be, coming into this situation there. And it just doesn't work.
Okay. Getting closer to home, in Prince George Peace River, what do you see as the main issues in this ride?
Well, Dawson Creek and Fort St. John and these places, it's very much like Alberta. I'm a pipe fitter, right? I'm a journeyman carpenter as well. And I see these towns very much like Alberta towns. And they're very much resource driven. And our resources are going to be shut down again by the UN because they want to be able to reduce the CO2 emissions and everything else. It's shutting down of our society. And so you got the Liberals and the Conservatives, they don't have an Energy East pipeline going all the way to the coast, you'd think you'd have that for national security. Why do we have to get, oil from, United States and foreign countries and even as far as Saudi Arabia in tankers? They have a tanker ban on the west coast they put out for us to be able to export our oil, but they don't have a tanker ban on the east coast bringing in Saudi Arabia oil. So it makes no sense that way, right? It actually does make sense, but it's so. So where were we? I guess I kind of lost track.
Some of the local issues.
Local issues. Okay, yeah. So the thing is to be able to develop our resources here, and not to shut down, the whole resource area here on account of caribou, right, and whatnot. So, so the Liberals and the Conservatives, they're not allowing these things to happen because they're going along with the UN Paris Accord. And that we have to reduce our emissions drastically. We're talking 30% reduction by 2030 of 2005 levels, even though we've increased our population by whatever it's been, 15, 20%, right? And so here's the difference, okay? You got Andrew Scheer, he says, he's doing a big song and dance. He's saying, we're gonna go ahead and have an energy corridor, right? And we're gonna be able to have, these things develop. And it gives people hope that something's gonna happen. But this is a 10-year type project. And anyone along the line can shut it down. Like right now, BC government and the Quebec government say no to the pipelines. And so they let it be like that. But we would use 9210 of the Constitution. And it's been used 300 times already in Canada. And it helped, bring the railway through the West and everything else. And so what that does is when you go and declare something to be in the national interest, then the Constitution totally backs it. So if we go ahead, we can sit there in an afternoon and write up this, one paragraph that Energy East pipeline is in the national interest. No one can touch it. if the governments of
But isn't that just a paper tool to get your way?
no, what we want to consult.
That's what Trudeau has done with Trans Mountain, right?
Yeah, we want to be able to consult and work with everyone and have everything. But after a couple months, if they're still, because this is what they've been doing all this time, shutting it down by saying no. Because in Quebec they're saying that the people don't want the pipeline. Well, no, the people want the pipeline. They'd rather have a pipeline than having the oil come in through tankers on their coast and also through rail car. So it's really just a silly thing there. And but anyhow, that's how easy it is. The point is that they could have done that. The Liberals or the Conservatives, they could have done that all this time, but they're not doing it. And we would, it's the provisions there. They're just doing a song and dance all around it, where it's very simple and straightforward. So we would go ahead and we would do that, and we'd see what happens. See, hopefully there's some companies that would still want to even build the pipeline. I mean, they've all gone south to the United States. A lot of their brain power and energy and everything. But it's still possible, I think, and so we could go ahead and do that and develop a resource sector. And then if we're going to get out of the UN agreements as much as we can. So this whole thing.
Would you pull out of the UN completely?
They don't talk about that.
Why not?
I don't know. The point would be is that we would start with getting out of the UN, agreements that we have that are binding our country up, and so from there you can, you could pull out of the UN, I suppose, but that's not being talked about right now. But we don't like the UN particularly, their policies, how they operate, and people need to realize that that's a great threat to our civilization here, because right now, if you're in a communist country and you don't like it, you can come to a free country and escape communism. But once they say they're 65% towards their goal of having a world, parliamentary assembly or a world government. They got a world court. They're setting everything up. They're setting up all of these different agreements and laws and everything else like that. And it's like a spider's web, and all of a sudden, bang! Like you're in the spider's web and you can't get out. So we want to push back against that. And, we want Canada to be.
So what's wrong with having an organization that looks at the world?
That's fine to do that as maybe a think tank or whatever, but ultimately we want to be able to have control in our decision-making process as to what we want to do in Canada. We don't want to have an outside body dictating to us what that's going to be. And the more you go along with the UN building up its power base and everything else like that, eventually it's going to come down to where basically it's like the EU, where like you have unelected bureaucrats or whatever dictating what happens in your country. So that's worthwhile researching. I think people need to check it out because it's a very serious issue, actually.
So why should people vote for you?
Well, because we're the only party that's going to actually help save Canada. I mean, all the other.
But you specifically.
Well, I mean, the UN is one. DET's another one. The extreme multiculturalism that is going on in our country divides our country. So we're going to defund multiculturalism. And we're going to get rid of the Multiculturalism Act. What we want is we want people to come to Canada who share our values, who support Western democracy, our freedoms, and we want them to ultimately assimilate into our society. They can still, you still have, the Ukrainians came in here, you got Vegreville in Alberta, they got their big Easter egg and stuff, and they still do their things, and that's all fine, but they've, worked in, all the European nations have done that with people. But we want to have it so that it's a Canada first, and not some other country being first, right? You go into some places, Vancouver, and it's just the signs there are all in Chinese and everything else, and like English should, or French should be the predominant language in our country, and not some other language, right? So,
but if you're in a free country, what's to stop me from putting up a sign in whatever language I like?
Oh, you can.
Well,
that's fine, but as a government, though, we want to be able to promote the fact that people want to get people to want to assimilate, to be able to maybe put up an English sign so that people can read it. But that sign issue is kind of a minor thing, really. It's more the issue of having Canada become in little tribes all over the place that don't get along. Like Andrew Scheer says, diversity is our strength, right? But if you have, let's say, two groups of people, and there are two groups of 10 people, and you have 10 people that are completely opposite of each other, completely diverse, and and you got 10 people that actually have a common kind of thing going, you know, maybe they like something the same or whatever, which group is going to cohere and be better? It's going to be this one because they have something in common, right? And so we have to have our, you know, our history, our Western democracy, our freedoms to be our common bond, right? So when people come into Canada, they need to expect that this is what it is, and that's not going to be something else. You know? So that's what we're concerned about. Is there anything else?
No, that should be good. That's lots.
Well, we got, when you go and look on our platform, right, we got the Canadian identity, ending official multiculturalism. You got the refugees, you know, ending open borders. We got the open borders at Rocks and Road in Quebec. Like 45,000 illegal migrants have come into Canada through the United States. It's costing us billions of dollars, and basically the RCMP are like bellhops bringing them in. So what we would do is we would actually declare the entire southern border a port of entry. So if anyone tries to cross at any place within that we would basically be able to just
build a wall.
No. Well, actually, we built a little fence over Roxham Road.
Yeah.
Probably $10,000. But no, and we would work out an agreement with the United States so that if people come across our border illegally that way, that we would be able to just send them back. Yeah.
But it's my understanding that people that for most people, where you mentioned there, they're all being processed when they come.
Yeah, they are being processed, and we're paying for them to be in hotels, and it's costing us, you know, huge amounts of money. And think about it: if the first thing you do when you come into a country is break their laws, what kind of a Canadian citizen are you going to be? They're totally bypassing our immigration system, disrespecting our country that way. And I've talked to lots of people who've immigrated into Canada, and they're really upset about that because they paid the price. They know what it took to get into Canada, and here you got all these guys just rifling in, you know, at a huge expense to them, and they're working, you know, like we have to work 5 months of the year to go ahead and pay for all of the, you know, the issues that they're doing, right? So we got the immigration, we got the pipelines. We want to go ahead and have pipelines. Freedom of expression is under attack in Canada in a big way. You know about Michael Cooper? Michael Cooper was an MP, conservative MP for St. Albert, and he was part of the Justice Committee, and they were talking about issues in Canada. And then there was a Muslim activist from Edmonton who spoke, and he said that the Muslim attacks that happened in Eastern Canada and also in Christchurch are a result of, you know, this conservatism, you know, like online. Michael Cooper took exception to that, and he says, no, that's not the case at all. And then he gave the example of the actual manifesto of the Christchurch shooter, and he basically stated that that he aligned more to communist China, and that he just wanted to start, you know, he did this in order to be able to create, you know, a whole issue, right? And so Michael Cooper said that. And what happened after that is the Liberals and the Conservatives, they took exception to that, and they went and voted to expunge his testimony from the record and all the video. And the Conservatives went along with it. They didn't, you know, and then they forced Michael Cooper to apologize. Now, Michael Cooper did cross the line a bit because he did get a little bit upset, and he said, you know, something a little bit derogatory to him. So for that, I can understand. But basically, the Conservatives went along with basically book burning in Canada of a politician. He said nothing wrong in the context of what he had to say with Christchurch. It was all accurate. And so the Conservative Party is going along with the destruction of freedom of expression and free speech in Canada.
But wouldn't you say that getting rid of multiculturalism is another way of getting rid of freedom of expression, because they're expressing their beliefs?
Well, they can. We have no problem with that. But as a federal government, we don't want to go ahead and fund and pay for and promote, you know, separate identities of people. We want to promote, you know, Canada and our identity. And then people coming into Canada, you know, people come to Canada because it's Canada. People go to Japan because it's Japan, or they go to Italy because it's Italy. Why do we have to be, you know, Justin Trudeau says that we have no core identity, you know? And so, yeah, so I mean, that's the thing there. I mean, it's supply management, you know, that's another issue that we want to be able to deal with, so we can lower the price of milk, dairy, and poultry by half, if possible. There's internal trade barriers that are going on. It's actually sometimes easier to trade with a foreign country than it is to trade with another province. And so that amounts to about a 3% tax, actually, that people pay for, our interprovincial stuff. We want healthcare is a big one. Healthcare is actually a provincial jurisdiction. Yeah. And what happens now is that the money is collected or whatever, it goes to the federal government, and then they dictate to the provinces how they're supposed to work with this to a certain degree. So we want to be able to end that, and we're going to actually use a GST. The GST amounts to about $40 billion a year. It's about the same as what's being used for the health transfer system, what they're doing. But that would be used, and that the federal government would basically stay out of the healthcare system and let the provinces deal with it. Because what's happening now is that the provinces are saying, well, it's the federal government's fault that this is a problem, and it's kind of going back and forth. Yeah, so it's and it's kind of passing the buck. But if you because the Constitution basically states that it should be a provincial jurisdiction, so we would honor the Constitution on that, leave it to the provinces to do what they're going to do, and if there's any problems with the system, it's the government of the province that has to deal with that. Another big issue is the firearms, because right now, actually, I'll tell you a story. Okay. I was in an EDA meeting over in Edmonton. And a fellow, I've seen him at many PPC rallies, and he's all over the place, he's traveling all around. He's very passionate about the firearms, But he sat down beside me and he says that he really liked Maxime Bernier's platform on the firearms and where he's going with it, but he says it's fatally flawed in that it continues to use the licensing system. So, and his issue is that with that licensing system, you really don't have property rights, because if your license lapse, every 5 years, if you let it lapse, then it's illegal to have your guns in your possession. So, so by scrapping we're going to scrap the Firearms Act. Okay, it's a radical thing, but it's a good thing to scrap it, and then we're going to have a certificate system. So if a person already has, a PAL or whatever to go ahead and acquire firearms, then they would be grandfathered in. Anyone who wants to acquire a firearm in the future, they'd have to also get training, to be able to do that. But then it's a lifetime certificate. And then there's no one going to come along and say, well, you're going to take your guns. Because that can happen right now. If for some reason you go into the hospital, let's say, and your thing lapses, the RCMP or whatever can come in and take the guns. So there's no property rights. And what else is there on that? But it's we want to be able to have, the people who have firearms are the most vetted people in Canada as it stands. That's not the issue. The problem is the people who get the illegal firearms, the criminals. They're not going to respect any of these laws that we have. So that's a really big one. Go check out our firearms platform. Oh, the story I was going to tell you. So anyhow, Todd Brown, that's his name. He was sitting beside me. He was saying all of this. And then there's another fellow who was in that meeting, and he's actually running in Red Deer, Mountain View. He was actually Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson's campaign manager when she went up against Jagmeet Singh. And he was there, and he's actually a competitive shooter.
Oh yeah.
So those two, and he writes policy for the People's Party of Canada. So the two of them got together for a policy on that. And Maxime Bernier obviously, knew about it, and the headquarters, it all got approved. But that's the thing with Maxime Bernier is that he'll take a position on something, but if something is actually, to be improved, he'll do it. I've seen him do it several times. Like before, one of the things, like as a candidate, you have to agree to the platform, right? And some of the, like we know that not everyone's going to agree with everything, but you're going to be willing to go along with it anyhow, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So one of them was to have free trade with China, which I had difficulty with. And but now, after this whole thing with
Huawei?
Yeah, whatever.
Okay,
yeah. So anyhow, she's, and then China taking all these actions against us, right? That Maxime Bernier says, it's off the table now. That issue of being able to have free trade with China. He sees, that there's a level of, problem with dealing with China, because China's not going to deal fair and play, fair that way, right? Another big issue is equalization. the Liberals and the Conservatives both had their kick at the cat as far as writing up the distribution of equalization. Now that's part of our Constitution, that's how it's written or whatever, so we have to keep that. But it doesn't have to be the way it is. So what happens now, like, I mean, billions of dollars are coming out of Alberta, and I believe out of BC as well, over to Eastern Canada. And Quebec gets a lot of it. Now Quebec, they don't have to go ahead and count their income from hydroelectric, but we have to count our income from our natural resources, from oil and gas. And Alberta is really hurting right now, and I know, probably over in BC it's as well. And why are we still paying billions of dollars to Quebec? So what we would do is we would rewrite the formula, dramatically change, we would actually go over a period of time so people can adjust, or provinces can adjust maybe over a 4 or 5 year period of time, but make it much more fair, and we've, and I know in Alberta, I don't know what they're paying, is it 12 or 18 billion dollars a year? Most of that can stay back in the province after that. Because what this is a permanent welfare system. It was set up in the beginning to help, all the different provinces, rise up and to get themselves. But now it's just basically a permanent welfare system, and so the provinces over there, they don't want to develop their natural resources because then they're going to lose all of this money, right? It'll be counted against them. But if you take away that system, then they will be encouraged to go ahead and develop their natural resources. And,
so how do you help the areas of the country that aren't doing well?
Well, I think what's going to happen is that there would still be a contingency fund to help those, like if there's having an issue. But I think that ultimately in the end that they're going to want to be able to develop their natural resources, and they'll be able to, finance their provincial governments and whatnot. One thing to note is that I actually, I quit my job to do this, and I won't probably get my job back, and it's a good job. I'm going to lose $25,000 to $30,000 of income to do this. I'm spending thousands of dollars, and I only voted 3 times. Okay, so that tells you, the drive that I have, and that's because I follow what's going on. Now, okay, I look at Bob Zimmer, and he's going along with a lot of these things, and I'm wondering, why is he doing that? Doesn't he have a conscience, or is he just that naive? Like, for instance, what's something that's just surfaced recently is there's a video of Andrew Scheer talking with Radical Imam, who wants to, he's a Sharia law type guy, right? Yeah. And what he does is he trains Muslim men how to properly beat their wives into submission. And he's sitting across the table talking to them, and he's pandering to this guy and going and whatnot. And so why would Bob Zimmer, or who's the candidate in
Todd Doherty? Yeah.
Okay, why are they going along with this? Why are they allowing this to happen? Why did they allow or not leave the party when Michael Cooper was defrocked like that or whatever, and had the kind of a book burning on his free speech, and on it goes. Actually, Maxime Bernier, he left the party saying it's intellectually and morally corrupt. And I think these candidates as well, they should do the same. And really, you should be talking to Bob Zimmer right here. Bob Zimmer should have crossed the floor, and he should have joined the PPC, but he didn't. And so he's on the wrong side of history, unfortunately. But I would, ask Bob Zimmer to actually do the right thing and to leave the Conservative Party, because he's not doing Canada any favors by staying along with it, going along with all this stuff. So, hey, Bob.
Yeah, there you go.